Kateryna Gupalo is a partner at Arzinger Law Office in Kyiv, Ukraine. She is the co-head of the dispute resolution practice and head of the white-collar defense practice. Today, we're going to be talking about sanctions, loopholes in sanctions, how to seize Russian assets, and we're also going to be talking about the ongoing supply of high-tech components that are helping to power Russia's war machine. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. If you enjoy the material we create, then please like and subscribe to help more people find our incredible guests on the channel. Do also please make comments, because this now is very important to YouTube's algorithm. Consider becoming a patron, buy me a coffee, and of course, check out the fantastic list of Ukrainian charities that we now put in the description of every video. Kateryna, welcome to the channel.
Thank you, and thank you for pronouncing my name and surname correctly from,
was it?
from the first time. Yeah.
That was a guess on my part. I'm glad I got it right. Getting the emphasis, isn't it, on the vowels is quite a difficult thing there. Hopefully, if we talk in this time next year, I might even be able to speak some basic Ukrainian as well. So I've now got some books on my shelf there, and looking forward to the holiday when I can read them. Is there a sense that the sanctions regime has not achieved its aims, and to some respects, especially for Ukrainians, is a disappointment?
Well, I would say it's a tricky question. To what extent? Because again, I'm talking from the point of view of Ukrainian, and maybe the answer to this question is in the basis what you are expecting from sanctions from the very beginning. So basically, in eyes of the commoner, sanctions would be something just to prevent Russia from aggressive actions, or to make them stop, or I don't know, make the economy collapse and stop the war. For me, but actually, sanctions, again, it's not punishment. It's like I call it like call to actions. And for example, if a individual is sanctioned, maybe he should change his behavior, and then in order to get delisted. From practical point of view, what are sanctions for Ukrainians? This night we again had a raid attack on Kyiv, and it was basically drones, because we are getting different times. It might be missiles, drones, ballistic. Last night it was drones. And again, when you're thinking about drones, they are not made of sticks and woods. They are made actually from high-tech technology. They require chips, and they require a lot of stuff that Russia do not produce. And but being like second year of war, somehow they are getting it. And in these terms, there is, I think, it's amazing job done, very interesting research. Our National Agency on Corruption Prevention, they have separate chapter on their website called War and Sanctions. And in their chapter recently, they put, let's say, a new sub-chapter, and it's dedicated to foreign details, components, spare parts in Russian weapon. So basically, you may, for example, go and check. For example, yesterday attack was done by Shahed drones, and you can go and check which components and from which state they proceed. Shahed drones are, just a little bit background, they are produced in Iran. So the first question is, how come Iran, that has been under sanctions for many years, how come they can produce such technology? It's a drone that can travel hundreds and hundreds of kilometers and carry a high rate of explosion. It's not easy to develop such technology. Somehow, living under sanctions, they managed to develop it. In terms of drones, of course, the majority of components are from China, which is like quite evident. China has not been a part of sanction enforcement world, but still, to my surprise, some components were from USA, and some I recall some from Japan. So basically, somehow they are still getting it. The other good example is Kinjal. Kinjal, it's Russian Wunderwaffe. So it's like missile that allegedly travels with a speed higher than the speed of sound. So basically, from the moment of launch from Russia to reach Kyiv, it's like 2-3 minutes to get. Again, we understand that it's high-end technology, and to my surprise, the components they have are like a lot of US-produced components, Switzerland, again, Japan, and we understand that those countries are not supplying directly Russia with those components. And so we have situation with sanctions and circumvention. So of course, and just to like, let's say, summarize and try to give answer to your question, even though seeing Russian, let's say, weapon with foreign technology still coming to our land, I wouldn't say that sanction does not work. They do work because it makes for them more difficult to get those components, more expensive, and again, the more money they spend on war, resources are not endless. But we still have the challenge, and we still have this problem of circumventing sanctions. And maybe again, it's just my personal opinion, and I might be mistaken because I'm not US or UK or EU practicing lawyers, but I recall like in 2022, Lisa Monaco, she is deputy director of DOJ, if I'm not mistaken, so she held a high position at DOJ in US. She told that sanctions are new FCPA, so lawyers were expecting a lot of enforcement on sanctions issue, and it seems that it's not enough. Again, it's only my personal opinion because I understand that we from outside may not see everything which is happening. But again, just to wrap up, sanctions do work. Maybe not as effective as we would wish, but I see that like new packages of sanctions are released, and companies that are engaged in circumventing sanctions, they also get sanctions. So it's a long process, and it's still like, let's say, ongoing.
And of course, it's not just the importance of legislation, it's the political will to implement and enforce that legislation, isn't it? And there's an interesting example with oil recently. It seems that only in the last couple of months have various sort of loopholes in the export of Russian oil via its grey fleet started to be actually enforced. So what's your view there on this interplay between legislation on the one hand that may have strong intent, and then at other times either a failure to or a scaling up of the political will to actually enforce these sanctions?
Again, just like my personal opinion, I do not think that there are like some kind of lack of political will from the point of countries like US, UK to prosecute those who are circumventing sanctions. Maybe it's not enough resources. Maybe it's like not having like more about issue of approaches, because in terms of sanctions circumventions, we see a lot of a reactive approach. Yeah, like fact happens, like there are loopholes, of course, that Russia would be looking for ways to circumvent it. And then when it's all discovered, the reaction comes. Maybe the approach should be more proactive, just to identifying loopholes and closing them, just to prevent from usage. Maybe like some additional resources should be also focused. But again, I'm just commenting from me sitting in Ukraine. We do not know what is happening in the cabinets of governments or DOJ, and maybe the issue is that it's not like, for example, when you're working as a defense attorney, you have criminal cases, there is general pattern, you know the procedure, what is happening. Of course, circumstances might be different, facts might be different, each and every case is particular, but you have general pattern, you know that it's called investigation, if then the charges and court, or for example, case closed, you know how it goes. But in terms of sanctions, sanctions has become really big topic and big issue just recently, yes. And basically what we are doing, we are exploring new routes, we are seeing how it works, and we are on practice checking if it works or not. So I think it's a issue of adjustment, because again, based on the statement of Lisa Monaco that sanctions are new FCPA, so it was clear statement that they are really going after it. And again, you know that it's the same as crimes, that this state is fighting against it for like centuries. The murder has been crime for many centuries, but you cannot eliminate it forever. You just do your best to prevent and prosecute if it happens.
And of course, one of the key, several reasons, of course, for the sanctions. One, of course, is to prevent the growth and various resources going to the Russian war machine. So there's some success there, certainly. One of the other intents there, as you mentioned earlier, is to persuade Russia that the aggression that it is embarked upon, that is unleashing, is not going to benefit it, and to try and prevent that aggression or stop that aggression. In this sense, that's clearly not working. Is this because, the kind of sanctions regime we see and the kind of pain that it imposes upon the civilian population, if you're in I would call it an economically rational country where the government is far more reflective of really what people want, i.e. there's a process there where the government has to be sensitive to people's economic needs, sanctions might work far better. But Russia seems to have nothing but contempt for its population in some ways. And the conscripts are starting to wake up to this. I don't know why it's taken so long. In effect, the population is treated almost as slaves by its government, and with total contempt. So it's not economically rational in that sense. Have we perhaps miscalculated and perhaps thought that Russia would behave far more like a Western country would behave under a similar regime?
That's a good question, because I would answer like in two. Let's say I would break the answer in two points about our expectations, like our Ukrainian as well from the West, and what and let's say what to do. So indeed, our expectations and as far as I understand, expectation of Western world was that due to the fact that economic situation would be harder the Russian government would stop. But I think the main problem is that we were thinking the democracy type of mind, yes, because democracies think of their people and they think of the response they would get from their people, and that's why it's so difficult to take unpopular decisions in the democracy world. While if you are talking about autocracy, tyranny, they just don't care about their people. And surprisingly for us, Russians are okay with it. And even worse, because, you know, economical side is one thing. So we might assume, because we are not in Russia, we cannot communicate with Russians, like we cannot measure what they are thinking. Yes, we cannot measure their perception. But again, even not for economical factors, we were thinking that at least Russians would protest due to the fact that because they have a lot of military losses in terms of Russian soldiers. The figure is quite high. Have you seen any protests? I haven't seen. I just seen some, let's say, videos and what they are of wives and mothers of Russian soldiers. But if you hear the message is just to either they were not paid money, or they are protesting about the fact that they, let's say, require some kind, you know, like rotation for their sons or husbands. So they are not protesting about this slogan, "Stop this war." They are protesting, or give us our money, or give us break, or give us information about our husband. But you know, it's more like you about their personal interest. So it's never about telling government you are doing wrong with the other state. So I would not be like, let's say, I think it's time to face the brutal reality and to expect that the population of Russia will not do any protest and will not make the government stop. The second part is what to do with it. And to my personal opinion, the topic of, or let's say, the phrase "sanctions are not effective" is very dangerous. In what terms? Because based on this, I hear, let's say, I read, I observe, I check some social media, and one may find another like message. So, as sanctions are not effective, let's cancel them and do business as usual. So you can see those narratives flying into our space, and this type of narratives are from one side very dangerous, and from second side I consider that they show that sanctions do work because Russia wants them to be cancelled. And so basically it's their for them it's to their advantage to say that, oh, sanctions don't work, so let's cancel them. Like, so we should be very careful with this statement. So again, maybe sanctions are not effective as we wanted it to be. Maybe they do not work the way we wanted it to work. But if we cancel them, the situation would be much worse.
And that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this rather odd sort of equation works in many areas, which is that the more Russia protests something and you reverse it, the more likely that is to be true. So the current huge optimism which the propagandists seem to be displaying may actually not be a sign that they genuinely think they're strong. It may actually be showing that there's some deep fragility behind that. Same thing with the sanctions. The more they put money into propaganda to try and get the sanctions cancelled, using the phrase "they're not working" is possibly an indicator that they are actually working. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bothering to, spend so much money on those messages. So I think that's absolutely fascinating. But there are multiple layers to the sanctions. So again, this idea that they're working, not working, is perhaps too simplistic to cover the full range of sanctions. And you've made some interesting comments, which I'd love to discuss here, about these so-called quasi-sanctions. And these are designating certain individuals or organizations as sponsors of war, holding their legal directors to account, and trying to find the assets of people who are in some way supporting either taxes to the Russian treasury or directly supporting the war through their statements and behaviors. Could you describe that sponsors of war concept and how it works legally and in practice?
Oh, thanks for this question. And if you don't mind, I would take it a little bit broader. So basically, the National Anti-Corruption Agency on Corruption Prevention, which I mentioned before, and I mentioned already their chapter on webpage War and Sanctions. And what you can see there, yes, you can find very nice tool for navigating and checking if some legal entity or individual is sanctioned in Ukraine or other jurisdictions. So they have very nice search tool. And also you may check the list of so-called candidates for sanctions. It's like a list of, again, individuals and legal entities that might be potentially sanctioned, and like a sign for a person that or change your behavior. For example, if you are holding position somewhere in Russian, let's say, state company, so please dismiss from that position or other stuff. There are another lists that are worth mentioning. Why? Because although it's purely Ukrainian list, but surprisingly, me as a lawyer, I'm getting from time to time requests from lawyers from like US, UK, or European Union about the situation. For example, like, we are representing this multinational company, which is, let's say, listed in the US stock exchange, and we saw that our top manager is on a list of war and sanction list of NAZK of foreign directors in Russia, and sometimes they even confuse it with sanction list. So I'm getting like request, oh, our top manager in sanction is sanctioned. I'm checking his surname and I see that he is not sanctioned, but he is on the list like of top managers in working in Russia. And so it was introduced by NAZK as a part of their project and their intent to general intent to encourage business to go out of Russia. And the list that you mentioned, like sponsors of war, it's about companies that work in Russia. It's also the part of a project to call this business to leave Russia and to stop paying taxes. And so from legal perspective, there is no, let's say, legal regulation behind it, because as I mentioned, it's not sanctions, and those type of lists, they are not regulated. You will not find any, like, let's say, governmental resolution on it, anything like that. It's purely reputational story. But to my surprise, it got to the extent that even, let's say, big multinational companies, they are they do care about being or not being on that list. Because at the beginning, I as a lawyer, I was skeptical about that list, and I was thinking, who would care if Ukraine puts someone on that list. But I see that it matters for individuals, and I see that they are having like problems. I wouldn't say problems, but sometimes they might to receive questions from their banks in terms of compliance. We see you on that list, please explain and please do something. And in terms of companies, in terms of this list of sponsors of war, as it's not legal stuff, we do not have regulation, and we do not have like let's say exact criteria. We do understand that you will highly likely to see on that list the companies that that are international and still operate in Russia, and the operation, let's say, there might be different criteria. For example, recently one Chinese company, one of the biggest Chinese construction company, I do not recall the name now, was introduced into this list because they made like intent or had some negotiation with Russian government regarding building the tunnel under the Crimean Bridge. So basically, and that's why for their intent to collaborate with Russian government in this, I would say it's not just infrastructure project, like having the tunnel under Crimean Bridge, it's military object, because this project is to ensure safe transfer of military equipment, etc. So they were put on that list, but it's not always the situation of having, let's say, some military contracts. Yes, it's in a lot of cases it's just enough to pay high taxes in Russia. And one interesting point is that, so basically, if you are international company and you are still present in Russia and you still are acting actively, you are not closing your business, you might be put on that list. The other situation is that in spring 2022, a lot of companies announced, we are putting on a stop our activities. We are not able to exit the Russian market, but we will not, let's say, develop it. And then we saw some companies forgetting about their statement and making new investment and developing the business and, taking the niche that was initially by competitor who exited. And such companies do get into this war and sponsors of war list. One more situation is that you might be in that list even though if you do not have presence in Russia. There has been situation when Irish companies had supply contracts to Russia. I do not recall details of those supplies, but the company was put on that list, and after that they reacted. They stopped supplies. They informed our government and the National Agency on Corruption Prevention that the contract was stopped, and after that they were removed. Surprisingly, that list, which is purely reputational, but it works. And surprisingly, it works not only on business, but also on political level. Because, for example, according to what we have on the media, there were 2 cases when the listing of banks from these sponsors of wars list was a condition for some political stuff. For example, let's take OTP Bank, which is Hungarian bank. It's present in Ukraine and still operates in Russia. And it was, let's say, one of the point of negotiations between Ukraine and Hungary in order to Hungary to vote in favor of the Ukraine-related decision. So basically, our government removed OTP from the list of sponsors of war. Also, OTP have not exited Russia, but it was a part of political deal. And the recent example is about Raiffeisen Bank, because Raiffeisen Bank, it's Austrian bank. They are very big in Russia. They as a lot of international banks exited Russia, so Raiffeisen Bank in Russia this year, they are like having huge revenues and paying respectively big taxes. And they also present in Ukraine. So Raiffeisen has been a long time on that list of sponsors of war. And the Austrian government, as one of the conditions for their approval for recent sanction package of EU, was delisting Raiffeisen Bank. I think that they solved somehow it another way, because I haven't seen news on delisting Raiffeisen. But it's interesting example how somehow not only legal tools, but purely reputational tools work.
And then we come to the slightly more directed sanctions, so the non-reputational, the actual specific sanctions, because even after 2014, there were a number of sort of interests within Ukraine that could be linked to Russian oligarchs, and indeed the so-called Ukrainian oligarchs. Many of them had connections to Russia and individuals in Russia. After the full-scale war, has the situation changed now, where there are a lot more sanctioned individuals and where a lot more assets have been pursued of individuals who may have interests in both Ukraine and Russia, and where there may be some suspicion about the provenance of those assets and indeed their usage?
Well, after 20, not after, since 2022, the introduction of sanctions has become, it's like crazy printer, I would say. Because like given like a bit of introduction, the regime of sanction, it was introduced in Ukraine in 2014, so it's very it's relatively new piece of legislation, yes. And we were getting some sanctions, some people were sanctioned, then delisted, and company going back and forth. But still the business with Russia was not forbidden, and still there was a lot of presence of Russian capital in Ukraine. So the sanction enforcement even in Ukraine was, I would say, in a low level. And as a result, what we see, what we have as of now, that, for example, we are in a situation when where we have basically just a couple providers of mobile connection, and they have at least partial ownership from Russian oligarchs like Mr. Friedman. And like, it's a quite difficult situation, because, you know, mobile operator, it's not something that you can easily substitute, yes? And it's not like real estate that you can easily transfer to someone else. So the presence of Russian business in Ukraine historically has been quite significant, and as well with oligarchs. And we are talking about, let's say, what we can see from registers, from corporate structure, but there is also situation when Russian oligarchs are not directly included into official corporate structure, yes, because there are a lot of tools in different jurisdictions, like nominal owners, trust, where you cannot see who is really behind the situation. So I think that the real picture we are just on our way to discover, and why it's important, because we have a relatively new piece of legislation that allows for confiscation of assets of sanctioned individuals. Of course, not all sanctioned individuals have those risks. There are criteria, but actually, if a sanctioned person supports Russian aggression into Ukraine, either by words or effectively, or is engaged in financing of Russian military, and by financing, it's not about or is engaged in military contracts somehow, and by financing, it doesn't it doesn't mean that you should like, let's say, give some money to military. Not one of the criteria is the amount of taxes paid. Yes, so if sanctioned person, individual or legal entity is paying the amount of taxes yearly above the threshold, they can be let's say candidate for this process of assets confiscation. Of course, it's not automatical. It should go via the court. There's a separate procedure for that, and but we've already having some cases and already having some court rulings on that. So it's quite interesting development.
Another area, of course, and this is quite problematic. I mean, you might not want to mention individual companies, but there are a number of, well, quite a large number of international entities who are still trading in Russia. And some of them are contributing tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars per year to the Russian treasury. We know that even in the official budget, the amount of money that goes to the military has dramatically increased. And that's just the official figures. Unofficially, it's likely to be far, far higher. So one could say these international companies are directly contributing to Russia's war machine. They are directly funding terror and murder. They continue to trade really using the excuse that their products are on various humanitarian lists. Some of them don't even give those kind of excuses, and yet there appears to be no real penalty for those companies. What legally can be done, and what can be done in terms of reputational implications, as you mentioned earlier, to try and persuade the remaining Western multinational entities that are still trading on a gigantic scale in the Russian Federation?
It's very difficult situation, and you know, it's a paradox that I was thinking about a lot. That from one hand, if we take those multinational companies that are US, UK, or EU based, from one hand, those companies themselves and their governments are spending a lot of money to help Ukraine. And those companies providing humanitarian aid to Ukrainians, and governments giving a lot of money to Ukraine in terms of military aid, and as well as another type of aid. And by the other hand, those companies are giving money to Russian government, and it's like the paradox is that by giving money to Russian government, they are giving more fuel to this war that would require from their governments, original governments like US, UK, EU, either to give more money, to continue giving money to Ukraine, or just to say, okay, full stop, okay, we are okay that Ukraine would cease to exist under Russian aggression one day. So it's a huge paradox, because again, those companies officially stating, oh, we are not supporting Russian aggression, we're against it, and so on and so forth. So it's a paradox which I cannot understand how both those situations can be, let's say, in simultaneously in one hand. Like there is some global CEO or board of directors, and how they can cope with this on daily basis. And of course, you would always find some words to say, some justification, but in principle, what to do is there are no legal, at least now, legal remedies that would prevent companies from staying in Russia. And so that's why this project of a national agency on corruption prevention that I mentioned, it slowly but at least works. To my opinion, it's not like legal tools that would help companies to understand that there is no use of staying in Russia and they should exit it. It's just they should face the brutal reality, and they should see the example of Carlsberg, because of what Russia did. They expropriated assets actually of Carlsberg, and so for me it's a good example for other companies present in Russia. Are you sure that it will not happen with you one day? Or for example, just recent news, I think it was it New York Times that published that Biden is discussing with that administration of Biden is discussing how on the ways to use those sovereign funds of Russia that are frozen. And the next was a statement from Russia that they, in case those sovereign funds would be given to Ukraine, Russian sovereign funds, they would react and respectfully. They did not tell what they're gonna do, but from a logical point of view, foreign countries do not put their sovereign funds in Russia, but there are a lot of assets of foreign companies in Russia. So this would be the target. So if I were CEO of multinational, the first thing I would do is just to run out of Russia, and because it's risky, each and every day you risk just to lose everything just in 1 minute.
Well, let's turn to the topic of the frozen Russian government assets, because yes, there are assets of individuals, and I think there's some interesting movement, as you said, with the announcement by Blinken that they may be able to go after individual assets, but by far the larger amount, and one that can make a really material difference to Ukraine's not just war effort but rebuilding effort as well, is the 300 billion in Russian state government assets, state bank assets, which are largely held in the European Union. I think there's less of them in the US and other jurisdictions. On the one hand, what do you think legally is still holding that up? Is there any legal justification for either confiscating or not confiscating these funds? But also, if it does happen now, could it have happened sooner? And is it rather the political issues in getting funding unlocked that are now causing governments to turn to this as a methodology, which seems to be again a demonstration of weakness of will? Because if the legal instruments were there to do it, then it could have been done earlier and not wait to this point in time.
This issue that has been hugely discussed among lawyers and politicians, and to my opinion, if that would be a political decision, and after that, let's say, some legal implementation. Because what is preventing, or just in other words, why we still haven't seen this tool applied? Because European Union, US, UK, they respect the right of ownership a lot. And again, each person or each state makes judgments, opinion based on their experience and their mindset. And in the West, your property is a property that you gained by your hard work or gained from your ancestor as your ancestry, again, result of hard work. And that's why you protect it a lot, and it's like, let's say, the high standard of protection. And that's why in terms of Western countries, like the property is like some graal, like some but what in my opinion, what Western countries do not understand, there are two and also the other thing that lawyers are objecting, that it would be against the rule of law. So what I comment that in terms of Russia, it's not the property that has been obtained as a result of hard work of generations. Yes, we had at the beginning of 20th century this revolution when the government, like Russian Empire, collapsed, and what Bolsheviks did, they just appropriated assets of everybody. And just for you to explain, for example, my family, they owned land plots, they owned mills, all that stuff. Bolsheviks took everything from us, so they were left with zero property. And then during time of Soviet Union, there was no private property. You were like, even you were given flat to live, but it wasn't your own flat, it wasn't your private property. And so in 90s time, when Soviet Union collapsed, you have a lot of properties that allegedly belongs to all people, and the process of, it was Wild West, hostile division of property. And it's not the property obtained by Russians, it's not, or Russia, it's not a result of hard work. It's a result of Wild West. And from other point of view, the paradox is that Russia doesn't care about the rule of law, because the war crimes they are committing, how it goes with the rule of law, they just like, for them, rule of law is nothing. So completely ignoring the rule of law in the territory of Russia and Ukraine, they are benefiting from all possible aspects of rule of law in the Western countries. But if we go deeply, and I think it's not even to lawyers, I think it's a question for professors of law who are deeply specializing in theory of law and the rule of law, to tell what is the rule of law. Yes, is it correctly interpreted? Because one of the elements of rule of law, I might be not using right terminology here, like justice, not in terms of judicial system, but like fairness. Yes, so is it fair to allow one to benefit from the protection if they completely ignore these principles in their land, in our land? So is it balanced? Can we call it justice? So I think that the issue is that we should, let's say, not like rethink the concept of rule of law, but to think if we are understanding it correctly and if we are using it correctly.
And of course, I mean, to conclude that thought, what you mentioned earlier, not only is Russia really not observing rule of law in its actions in Ukraine, you also have the annexation of territories which do not belong to it under international law, and you have the confiscation of assets of Western companies in a completely illegal manner on the territory of Russia. So it's not just, got a different set of laws. It has completely rejected the entire framework of what most countries understand to be laws around sort of property, wealth, ownership, and of course sovereign borders. In that sense, you say it's ironic that we're applying rule of law sort of cultures and behaviors onto a country that has nothing but contempt for those conventions.
Yes, it's a good summary of yours.
This is an incredibly important topic. I mean, from covering the loopholes to tech components, seizure assets, and so on. I hope that you, your colleagues within the legal profession, are able to make progress on all these fronts. Clearly, it's critical to Ukraine's war effort, to its survival, to its eventual victory. And I'm very grateful that you're able to spend time this morning to explain some of these complex and nuanced issues to our audience.
Thanks for inviting me and thanks for having me here.
It's a huge pleasure. And as things develop, do send us updates and we can post them to the audience as they happen. But thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you.